At 1:47 in the morning, the police broke down my bedroom door with flashlights blasting and a warrant in hand. I stood frozen in the wreckage while two officers flipped my furniture looking for evidence, and a third read the charges out loud for the whole house to hear. Estate fraud. Out in the hallway, my parents stood arm in arm, smiling like it was Christmas morning. My younger sister was right behind them, phone held up high, live streaming my arrest to over 1 million people. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I held out both wrists for the cuffs, because the second that officer typed my name into his system back at the station, every screen in that building was about to turn red, and not one of them had any idea why yet. My name is Imogen. I'm 34. This is the story of how my own family tried to frame me for a crime, and instead handed themselves a federal one. If you've ever watched people who were supposed to love you smile while they hurt you, stay with me. It gets better than you think. Hit like, subscribe if you want to see exactly how this ends, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now let me take you back to 3 months before that door came off its hinges. To understand why that night happened at all, you need to understand the family I grew up in. I was the oldest of two, the one who got good grades and asked too many questions, and never quite fit the role my parents wanted me to play. My sister Vienna was 4 years younger, and exactly the opposite. Charming, photogenic, the kind of kid who got away with things because she smiled while doing them. By the time she was 20, she built an online following, posting about her glamorous, effortless life. Most of it quietly funded by our parents. I was the one who paid for my own college, worked 2 jobs through my 20s, and ended up in a career nobody at family dinners ever wanted to ask about. Because the honest answer, federal financial crimes investigator, made people uncomfortable in ways I'd long since stopped explaining. My parents, Reginald and Helena, had spent decades treating Vienna's confidence like a personality trait worth investing in, and my discipline like a slightly embarrassing hobby I'd taken too seriously. Holidays were civil. Birthdays were civil. We weren't a family that screamed at each other. We were a family that smiled through gritted teeth and saved the real feelings for whispered conversations the second I left the room. I'd made peace with that arrangement a long time ago. I didn't need them to love me the way they loved her. I just needed them to leave me alone. That arrangement held for years, right up until my grandfather died and left me something none of us expected. 3 months before the night the police came for me, I drove across town to sit in on the reading of his will. We gathered at a downtown law office, me on one side of a long conference table, my parents and Vienna on the other, our family attorney, Calvin Holloway, at the head of it, with a thick folder and a wax-sealed envelope. Holloway worked through the small bequests first, a car, some furniture, a handful of minor accounts, before he reached the real number. My grandfather's trust, just over $5 million, had been left to me entirely. Sole owner, no conditions, no co-trustees. He read it in his flat, rehearsed voice, then paused for a long sip of water before adding one more clause, almost as an afterthought. Language about how administrative control of the trust would automatically transfer to a designated party in the event I were ever legally incapacitated. He read that part slowly, deliberately, like he wanted to be absolutely certain everyone at that table caught every word of it. Vienna turned her head and looked at my mother first. My mother gave my father one sharp nod across the table, lasting maybe 2 seconds. It was such a small thing, but I'd spent 12 years reading exactly that kind of silent signal for a living, and I knew immediately what I was looking at. My mother leaned forward, hands clenched into fists on the polished wood. "She doesn't deserve that money," she said, loud enough that I'm sure the receptionist heard it through the door. "We need to do something about this." My father just nodded along beside her, tapping his fingers on the table, the way he does when he's already calculating something in his head. Nobody contested the will. Nobody asked Holloway a single follow-up question about how the trust was structured, which is exactly the kind of question a normal, concerned family asks. They just traded that look, while Holloway carefully avoided meeting my eyes for the rest of the meeting. I gathered my things and walked out without saying a word. Confronting them in that room would have cost me the only real advantage I had left, which was that none of them yet understood. I already knew exactly what they were. 4 weeks later, a security alert hit my phone. followed almost immediately by a call from my bank. "Ms. Sutter, we flagged several failed login attempts from an unrecognized network," the representative told me, her voice carefully professional. I already had a fairly good guess where that traffic was coming from. "Leave the account exactly as it is," I told her. "I know who's responsible. I'll handle it from here." I hung up and sat with that for a minute, feeling less surprised than I probably should have. It wasn't the only sign. For weeks I'd had this low, persistent feeling of being tracked. Small things that didn't add up on their own. A car idling too long outside my house on trash day. A delivery I never placed showing up at my address under someone else's name. None of it would hold up as evidence by itself, but stacked together, it told me something important. This had stopped being a family disagreement and started being a plan. Someone was studying my schedule, figuring out exactly when my house sat empty. So I spent a weekend installing a small set of high-definition cameras myself, one angled at the front entryway, one covering my home office, both small enough that you'd need to know exactly where to look to ever find them. I told myself it was just due diligence. Some part of me already suspected it would be more than that. It didn't take long to find out which. A few days later, I was sitting in a diner finishing lunch when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the live feed right there at the table and watched my own sister let herself into my house with a spare key she must have lifted from my bag months earlier. She moved with this calm, practiced confidence, straight to the locked drawers of my desk, going through my private files, drawer by drawer, and photographing document after document on her phone. Watching that happen in real time from a diner booth was its own kind of strange. I sat there with a cooling cup of coffee, completely still, while my sister rifled through my life on a 4-inch screen. Any reasonable person would have called the police that afternoon, or at the very least, changed the locks before dinner. I could have submitted that footage to my own agency and had her in custody for breaking and entering within the hour. But arresting Vienna alone would have only caught the smallest, most replaceable piece of this. The messenger, not the people sending her. I needed something that caught everyone at once, airtight enough that none of their lawyers could plea their way around it. So I backed up the footage somewhere secure, drove home that evening, and acted like nothing had happened. I left the drawers exactly the way she'd left them, half open, papers slightly out of order, so she'd report back that the mission had gone perfectly. Letting them believe they were winning was the entire strategy. I needed them relaxed enough to keep escalating, right up until they crossed a line they couldn't walk back from. Here's the detail none of them knew, the one that was about to matter more than anything else in this story. To my family, I was just the boring one who does spreadsheets for the government. What I actually did for over a decade was investigate financial crime for the FBI, specifically the kind of slow, paper-heavy fraud that takes patience most people don't have. My access and clearance ran considerably deeper than anyone at that conference table understood, including, I suspect, Holloway, who only ever knew me as a name on a will. Once, I had the footage of Vienna's break-in and the pattern of digital intrusions tied back to Holloway's office. I didn't go rogue with any of it. I brought it to my supervisor, a sharp, no-nonsense agent named Daniela Castillo, and laid out exactly what I believed was happening. A coordinated scheme by my own family and their attorney to manufacture grounds to seize a $5 million trust. Daniela listened to the whole thing without interrupting once, then asked me a single question. "Do you think you can get them to commit an actual federal crime on the record without compromising the case by being personally involved?" I told her I thought I could. She authorized the operation that same week on the condition that everything stay fully documented, fully sanctioned, and that I never act outside the boundaries we agreed on. Everything that happened after that point, every camera, every planted document, every quiet evening spent waiting in the dark, happened with the full backing of the Bureau. That part matters, because what came next only worked because it was real, sanctioned federal pressure, not personal theater. 3 days before the night they finally came for me, I put the last piece of the operation into motion. The trap my family thought they were building for me was nothing compared to the one already built for them. They needed a push, something to move them from quietly resentful to actually committing a documented crime. Because resentment alone isn't illegal, no matter how loud it gets at a dinner table. So, with Daniela's sign-off, I built a folder of completely fabricated financial records, fake offshore wire transfers, doctored account statements, the kind of paperwork that looks devastating to an amateur and falls apart instantly under a real forensic review. I printed the whole thing and left it sitting in plain sight on my home office desk. I knew Vienna was still watching the house. Leaving it out in the open, all but guaranteed she'd take the bait within 48 hours. That same afternoon, my closest friend Soraya pulled up outside in a rented moving truck. For the benefit of anyone watching from across the street, we spent 20 minutes loading old furniture into the back, like I was simply relocating. What we were actually moving were my real files, the original trust documents, my case notes, everything that mattered, to a secure location completely outside anyone's reach. Soraya paused halfway through hauling a box of files and looked at me, genuinely worried. "You're really going to let them file a false police report against you," she said. It wasn't really a question. I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "That's exactly what I need them to do," I told her. "It's the only way this stops being my problem and becomes theirs, permanently, in a courtroom." She didn't look convinced, but she finished loading the truck anyway, hugged me once, and drove off without another word. I knew exactly what I was asking of her, and of myself. Once that fake report got filed, there'd be no quiet, gentle way to undo any of it. Once she was gone, I sat alone in my dark living room with a full pot of coffee, every light in the house turned off, and waited. I already knew, with total professional certainty, that Holloway would push my parents to file a police report using my own planted documents as supposed proof of estate fraud. Filing a report built on knowingly fabricated financial evidence turns a petty family grudge into a federal offense overnight. That's not a loophole. That's just how the law works once you put your signature on a lie. I thought, sitting there in the dark, about every dinner table comment I'd swallowed for 30 years. Every time I'd been the quiet, easy-to-overlook daughter, while Vienna got the attention, and Reginald and Helena got to feel proud of themselves for it. None of that mattered anymore in the way it used to. What mattered was that I had documentation, sanctioned authority, and a plan that didn't require anyone in that family to ever apologize, just to face consequences whether they meant to or not. So I sat in the dark, staring at my front door, and let the arrest come to me on its own schedule. By a little after 2 a.m, I was standing at the booking counter inside the local precinct, breathing in that particular mix of industrial cleaner and old coffee every police station seems to share. They had me empty my pockets onto a metal tray, wallet, keys, nothing else, and I didn't resist a single part of it. Dignity wasn't the priority that night. The officer behind the counter looked like he'd already lived through every version of this shift 100 times before. Heavy eyes, slow hands, the particular exhaustion of someone halfway through an overnight rotation. He typed my full name and details into the booking system to finalize the arrest record, hit enter without much ceremony, and let out a long, bored sigh. Then his monitor turned red. A warning banner filled the entire screen, blocking every other window, flashing language about a federally protected identity with severely restricted access. The system locked his terminal completely, and somewhere behind the scenes, fired off an automated alert well above his department's pay grade. I watched the color drain out of his face in real time. He shoved his chair back so hard it scraped loudly across the tile, staring at me like I'd just turned into something he didn't have a procedure for. He grabbed the desk phone, fumbling the keypad as he tried to bypass the normal dispatch line and reach his supervisor directly. I don't know what this is," he said into the receiver, his voice cracking slightly. "Some kind of federal protected identity flag. I've never seen anything like this in my life." Whatever his chief said back on the other end made the entire room go still. Within a minute, another officer approached, hesitated, and quietly unlocked the cuffs from my wrists without a word of explanation, treating me less like a suspect now and more like an anomaly nobody wanted to be responsible for. I was walked, almost gently, into a separate interview room and left alone. I sat there for about 15 minutes, hands finally free, listening to muffled, urgent voices arguing somewhere down the hallway. Then the door swung open, hard enough to bounce off the wall. The chief of police walked in, already breathing fast, like he'd taken the stairs 2 at a time, straight from his car. He looked at me with open, almost personal suspicion. clearly trying to reconcile the woman sitting calmly in front of him, booked on what looked like a quiet family financial dispute, with whatever warning had just frozen his department's entire system. He ordered the room cleared and shut the door behind him himself. "I need to see real proof of who you actually are," he said. "Right now. Not a badge number. Proof." I reached into my jacket and slid a credentials case across the table. He opened it, studied the federal seal pressed into the card for a long moment, and then picked up his own phone rather than just take my word for it, dialing a verification line directly. The room went completely silent while he waited for someone on the other end to confirm it. When the confirmation finally came through, something in his whole posture changed. He set my credentials down gently on the table, like they suddenly weighed more than they had a minute earlier. "You're a federal agent," he said slowly, "working financial crimes, and you let my officers arrest you tonight." "I let them book me," I said. "I needed that exact paper trail, a documented, witnessed arrest based on evidence my own family knowingly fabricated. I've been building this case for months with full Bureau authorization. As of right now, this stops being a local matter. The Bureau is formally taking over the entire investigation, effective immediately." I pulled a small encrypted drive from a hidden inner pocket and set it on the table between us. "Everything's on here. Proof that the family attorney accepted payments from my father to quietly rewrite trust documents in their favor. Surveillance footage of my sister breaking into my home to plant the evidence used to file the report that got me arrested tonight. There's enough here to close all 3 of their cases before a single defense attorney even gets a chance to negotiate." He looked at the drive for a long moment, then back at me. "You really planned this whole thing, the arrest included." "I didn't plan to get arrested," I said. "I planned for it to be possible, and I let it happen once it became the fastest way to lock everything down. There's a difference." Before sunrise, while my family believed they were celebrating a clean victory, federal vehicles closed in quietly on 2 locations at once. At my parents' house, Vienna was still broadcasting live, parading through their living room and reading hateful comments aloud to over 1 million viewers, narrating in real time how I was finally getting what I deserved. My parents sat behind her on the couch with champagne, toasting along with every cruel line scrolling past underneath her face. None of them noticed the unmarked vehicles already positioned outside. Engines off, agents waiting for the signal. The front door came down fast and without warning. Agents moved through the house in tight practice formation, calling out instructions, securing every exit before anyone had time to react. One agent reached out and pulled the phone directly out of Vienna's hands mid-sentence, cutting the broadcast instantly. On the other end of that feed, over 1 million strangers watched the screen go black in the middle of her own celebration, and the comment section, which had spent the last hour mocking me, flipped almost instantly into pure panic on her behalf. My parents were walked out of their own house in handcuffs in front of half the street. The same smug, satisfied expressions from a few hours earlier, completely gone, replaced by something closer to disbelief. Reginald kept repeating that there had to be some kind of mistake. Helena didn't say anything at all. Across town, in perfect coordination, a second team moved on Holloway's law office at the exact same moment, taking him into custody at his own desk before he had a chance to shred so much as a single page. They seized his computers, his physical files, every record connecting him to the payments my father had made to help engineer my downfall. I watched most of it unfold from a monitor, back at the federal field office, sipping coffee that had long since gone cold, while agents confirmed each arrest over the radio one after another. There wasn't much triumph in it, honestly. It mostly just felt like the truth finally catching up to people who had spent their whole lives assuming it never would. The trial took 14 months to reach its end. By the time it did, the evidence was thorough enough that none of their defense teams could negotiate much of anything down. Holloway was sentenced to 12 years and permanently disbarred, his name struck from the state bar's records entirely. My parents each received 8 years, along with a court order stripping every asset tied to the scheme for restitution. Vienna got 5 years, plus a probation condition I genuinely never expected a judge to write into an order in my lifetime. A permanent ban from operating any social media account on any platform indefinitely. My mother gripped the railing of the defendant's box and sobbed openly in front of a packed courtroom gallery. "Imogen, please," she said, voice breaking. I know I was wrong. Please, just forgive me." I looked at her for a long moment. I didn't feel rage in that second, and I didn't feel satisfaction either. Not really. Mostly, I just felt finished, like I'd been carrying something heavy for 34 years and had finally, quietly, set it down. I turned and walked out of that courtroom without saying a single word back to any of them. Outside, the morning light felt different somehow. Not dramatic, just clean. I stood on the courthouse steps for a minute before heading to my car, genuinely done carrying a version of my family I'd been protecting out of pure habit, long after any of them had stopped earning it. 6 months later, my life looks almost embarrassingly normal. I still go to work. I still drink bad coffee out of the paper cup at my desk. Soraya and I get dinner most Fridays, and she still brings up that moving truck every single time, like it's our private inside joke now, instead of the most stressful afternoon either of us has ever lived through. I haven't spoken to my parents or Vienna since the sentencing, and I don't plan to. Some doors close on their own. Some you close yourself deliberately and don't look back through. I'm not telling you this story because I think what happened to me is rare. Betrayal almost never comes from strangers. It comes from people who already know exactly where you keep your spare key, what time you leave for work, which buttons to press to make you doubt yourself first. What actually got me through it wasn't anger. It was patience, documentation, and a refusal to let anyone rush me into reacting before I had the full picture in front of me. If your own family ever shows you exactly who they are, believe them the first time. Build your case quietly, whatever that looks like in your situation. Protect your own peace before you protect their feelings about losing access to it. And understand that walking away from people who hurt you isn't weakness. In my experience, it's usually the most disciplined thing you'll ever do. So tell me, if you found out tomorrow that your own family was actively trying to frame you for something you didn't do, what's the very first thing you'd do? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe if you want more stories like this one.